This meeting to order. Today is Tuesday, September 28th, 2021. This is a Prescott City Council study session. Let's please call roll.
Mayor Mangarelli.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Scholl.
Here.
Councilman Blair.
Here.
Councilman Good.
Here.
Councilmember Roosing.
Here.
Councilman Sischka.
Here.
And Councilman Tenney.
Here.
All are present.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here today. We have two items. If you'd like to make a public comment, I think Sarah has cards out there on the table. So we'll start with item 3A, please.
Discussion regarding possible amendments to City Code 2-1-9 Utilities Division.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Gwen Rowich, Public Works Deputy Director. So we're going to talk a little bit this afternoon about a request that came from the Council in late July for the staff to look at the possibility of adding sub-meters to projects that are master metered here within the city of Prescott. Let's see if I can get this to scroll a little bit. So I just wanted to start first with some of the research that Dana Walsh from the legal department and I did regarding the use of sub-meters. Namely, Arizona Revised Statute calls that out that a landlord can charge separately for gas, electric, wastewater, solid waste, or electricity, or water by installing sub-metering systems. They're allowed to do that by allocating those charges separately through a couple of ways. One is called a ratio utility billing system, or RUB, and when the RUB is used, it essentially means that the landlord determines a fair way to divide the cost of that particular utility service. So they could do it based on how many occupants are in the unit. They could do it based on the square footage of the unit, or any way that they feel is fair and equitable. So the state law does provide for using the use of sub-meters, although we mainly see it in gas and electric. We did some more research into Arizona communities, and mainly what we found was that it was encouraged through conservation codes. Water conservation codes primarily encouraged the use of sub-metering, but we really didn't find it as a requirement in many of the codes that we looked in, with the exception of the town of Sierra Vista. They do require what they call independent unit metering, but they also provide an exception to the independent unit metering if the landlord used the RUB method, because it's allowed by state law. They also give exceptions for low and moderate income tenants that are defined by HUD. So if a low income project were to come in, they may not require the use of sub-metering. That was the only Arizona reference that we located. We did find some other references to the use of water meters in larger communities here within the state that require separate meters in these larger projects for things like landscaping, pools, or other amenities anytime there's apartment or multifamily development, but they don't require sub-metering for individual units. We broadened our search a bit out to the city of Portland, Oregon, and San Diego, California, where we did find some standards which we were able to use to come up with a proposal for council's consideration today. So what we're proposing is an amendment to two parts of City Code. Section 2-1-9 is abbreviations and definitions, which we think will help clarify things quite a bit. And also 2-1-24, which is water meters, which defines when a master meter can and cannot be used, as well as guidelines for the installation of a private meter if we decide to do that. This item did go to the Water Issues Committee on September 7th. And we were asked to provide some additional clarification to the apartment consumer definition, which I'm going to go over here in just a minute. And we also placed this item on the public notice section of the website. We received 24 hits since September 7th, pardon me. We received 24 hits to the website and one email inquiry from the Multifamily Housing Association of Arizona, which Dana was kind enough to respond to. So I've highlighted the changes in blue just to make it a little bit easier to see. During the WIC meeting, Leslie Hoy brought to our attention that we may have some conflict in the language under the definition of apartment consumer. And so we made some clarification to that, where we said that an apartment consumer is a building with one or more buildings which has common plumbing system within the building and is serviced by one master meter. And apartment consumers are considered to be a multifamily consumer. And you'll note here that the definition is actually for the word consumer right here. And then we have 6 different definitions of consumers. This definition is also used partly for utility billing purposes, so we had to coordinate with finance to make sure we didn't mess with their processes. The main change I want to bring your attention to is the multifamily consumer, where we've added the word single-family resident or rental unit development. So single-family rental unit development would also be considered a multifamily consumer development. And that's important as we go down into the next set of definitions. So we're proposing to add a new definition for master meter, which will mean a meter which measures the water usage of multifamily consumer developments from the same meter. The meter is the responsibility of the landlord or owner, who then receives the bill as measured through one water meter. We're also proposing to add a second new definition for private water meter. This would be defined as a submeter or flow monitoring device owned by a party other than the city, placed behind a master meter to measure water consumption of each individual dwelling unit within a multifamily consumer development in order to monitor water consumption. A private water meter is not owned, used, or maintained by the city for billing purposes, nor is it subject to development impact fees. Are there any questions about those before I move on? Yes.
I just have a question. How much does the city charge for the installation of a regular water meter on a single-family home?
I'm sorry, I don't know the exact amount of a water development impact fee. Not off the top of my head. It's a combination. It's a combination of water and sewer and street and police and fire. So altogether, it's about $8,000. The wastewater is about $3,000. So I want to say it's in that range, $3,000 to $4,000.
Thank you.
So we're also proposing to make an amendment to City Code 2-1-24, which governs the use of water meters. And we've added a little bit of clarification so that you can see here that each building supplied with water has to have its own separate service connection and meter or master meter, except if you have 2 or more buildings that are located on the same lot that is contiguous or continuous under the same ownership, then you can use a master meter. So I think what's important here, the changes here, and it's not even really a change, I apologize, it's not a change. But the definition says that if you own multiple buildings and it's under the same ownership, you can use a master meter. It's not defined by common walls or connectivity to other dwelling units within the property. We have added a new paragraph here at the end that talks about the installation of a private water meter required for each individual dwelling unit sharing a common master meter for monitoring of individual water usage and to encourage water conservation in multifamily consumer residential development. However, private water meters are not required for apartment buildings with one common plumbing system.
So this would apply if we had a development with 20 duplexes
It would.
and 20 triplexes
If they use a master meter, it would.
or quadplexes.
If they use a master meter, it would,
Okay.
yes. And by the definition of multifamily, let me go back up here. The definition of multifamily consumer is any housing having one or more common walls with another housing in a multifamily residential structure served by a master meter, including units in a duplex, triplex, fourplex, condominium development, or townhouse development. It also includes mobile homes located in a mobile home park, single-family rental unit development, and other residential developments that share a common master meter. That
I can think of.
I have a question. We've been seeing a surge in these single-family homes that are clustered together, but they somehow qualify as multifamily zoning and regulations because they're going to all be rentals. going forward, what if the owner decides he wants that the mass rental market is not profitable enough, and he decides to condo all these individual homes that are on 1 meter? And will he be required to then install an $8,000 meter on every one of his 200 homes? Or will he be required to submeter, or what's the problem there for him?
So if a multifamily project, such as a multifamily rental unit project, were to want to convert to single ownership, they would have to go through a subdivision process. The Land Development Code requires, and the City Code requires, that each individual unit have its own meter. Having said that, the Land Development Code, under the subdivision regulations, does provide for a council to grant exceptions to the rules when a project is subdivided. That doesn't mean the council has to provide an exception, only that they may grant an exception. So whenever these kinds of projects convert to a standard subdivision so that individual lots can be sold and they're no longer under single ownership, we would expect to see them have individual water meters when they subdivide, or be granted an exception by council.
Well, I'm talking about, say, an existing complex.
And I am too.
Of single level individual homes that were considered all under one owner. They were rentals. If they were all sold off individually, if they were already submetered, then they wouldn't have to put in a master meter. But if they're not submetered, then they'd have to put in a individual meter, a $8,000 individual meter.
So the $8,000 is the impact fee, but under this regulation, the submeter would be there, but it's likely that the city would replace those with a city meter so that they can be billed.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah, so Gwen, if they replaced the sub-meters with city meters, would the city have to take over the infrastructure and be responsible for working with the infrastructure if it ever broke or anything like that?
So that does happen from time to time here at the city, where an older development that developed not under our current regulations will come to the city and ask us to take over their private infrastructure. Generally, we do require that they bring the infrastructure up to current standards before we'll accept it for long-term maintenance. So even if the property were to be subdivided, that would be a conversation we would have at the time of development.
Okay, thank you.
Lastly, I'll just say that this item is scheduled for a voting session on October 12th. I'm sorry, was there another question?
How expensive, what's the installation cost of a private water meter? I'm just thinking in the sense that some multifamily housing tend to be geared towards maybe lower income families. And if this requirement is going to make affordable housing even less accessible in our area.
Well, when the project came forward that was out in Granite Dells Estates, they've already submitted a potential submetering device to us, and the developer of that project told me the cost is about $200 to $250 a home to install that submeter device. But he is doing the single family rentals, so they're separated.
And just to clarify, the proposal that we're looking at would potentially require submetering in certain circumstances. And the net impact of that would simply be allowing landlord and tenant both to monitor water use. There wouldn't be any opportunity for the city to adjust rates for the end user, but only for the landlord potentially, depending on the overall use in the.
That's correct, Councilman Tenney. The purpose of the submeter is to provide awareness to the user of how much water they're using, and as well as the landowner or the developer of how much water is being used by each individual unit to promote water conservation. But the water usage charge is determined by rates.
Sure.
And so the landlord ultimately would be responsible for whatever usage is occurring.
So the landlord could potentially use that data to provide incentives or limits, I mean, maybe not limits, I guess, but incentives for people to conserve.
Correct. And that goes back to the Rubes method that may also help them determine how they decide who pays how much.
Gotcha. Okay. Good clarification. Thank you.
Also, if there's a leak somewhere in their system, won't it be easier for them to detect it earlier?
That's correct, Councilperson Rusing. Leaks are one of the, meters are one of the main ways we can tell when we have a leak. And so, yes, that would bring awareness to them for that as well.
Anything else for Gwen?
Again, October 12th, voting session, and it'll go into effect 30 days later.
Sounds good.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Gwen.
Yeah.
Mayor, I do have a hand raised in
Oh, yeah.
Zoom.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Mr. Mechanic, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay, I just wanted to comment regarding Councilwoman Scholl's question about low income. It is advantageous, probably more for low income people, to have sub-metering. And the reason is, if there are many units and there's no sub-metering, the water use is much higher. Therefore, the water bill for the whole complex is much higher, and the share of the water bill for each low-income user is much higher. So it seems to me that the $200 investment is well worth it. Now, the investigations I've done in the past showed that there could be a 30% water savings by having sub-metering. So that's substantial. That's my comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Howard. I don't disagree with any of that. I was just trying to get my arms around the initial upfront cost that this would put on landlords. And so it's actually a lot less than I was thinking it was going to be. And I agree with your comments.
Any other public comment?
Yes, Leslie Hoy also has her hand up.
Okay.
And you can go ahead and unmute yourself, Leslie.
Hi, I just want to thank Gwen and Dana for pursuing this. And I hope the council will vote in favor of this when it comes to council on October 12th. And also to the council people who have supported the idea of sub-metering too. Thanks to everyone. That's all. Have a great day.
Any other public comment?
That's all I've got.
All right. Thank you, Gwen. Let's go to item B.
Discussion and update on Antelope Hills golf operations and capital improvement projects.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Before I start, I want to introduce, we have Justin Henderson in the audience. Justin is the general manager for Indigo Golf, was once Billy Casper Golf out at Antelope Hills. Thank you, Justin, for being here. So it's been a while since we've given an update on Antelope Hills Golf Course, so I wanted to give you guys the opportunity for just a little more insight into what's happening. First of all, what is Antelope Hills? Well, it's two 18-hole golf courses. North course was built in 1956 and the south in 1992, so those courses have both been around for a while. Okay. It also has a full-service restaurant and bar. That's the Manzanita Grill, which is this last year was the first year that we broke $1 million in revenues there, so it's a real popular restaurant. The 160-seat banquet hall, which is called the Centennial Center, and a little less with COVID. Obviously, not as many banquets going on, so that suffered a little bit, but it's interesting times we live in. Golf driving range, 130 golf carts, beverage carts, and a pro shop that sells golf apparel, equipment sales, and rentals. So I show you this because this is everything that touches revenue, and everything that touches revenue is under Billy Casper's management. So that's what they do, is they market, and they are the ones that are in charge of producing the revenue for the golf course. A little bit of history. Between 1956 and 2014, the city of Prescott managed and performed both business operations and the maintenance roles at Antelope Hills with varying degrees of success. Some years were okay, and some years not so much. In about 2000, we started seeing a glut in the golf industry of golf courses being built, and so that really put the pressure on the golf industry. And then the recession in 2008 really hurt the golf courses, made many of us, including Antelope Hills, look at alternative operation models, which we moved into. So in 2014, actually fiscal year 15, the city entered into a management agreement with Billy Casper Golf, who is now Indigo Golf, which is a division of Troon. We contract with Indigo to manage the business operations, the things I showed you before, anything that touches revenue, the business operations of Antelope Hills, which includes the golf and food and beverage. All of the employees on the business operations are Indigo Golf employees. So they're employed by Indigo Golf and managed by Justin. Troon, the parent company of Indigo, is the largest golf management company in the world. They operate over 600 courses all over the world. Remember, the revenues and the expenses from the operations are the city's. So Indigo Golf is just a manager. They get paid a management fee. That's a flat fee with incentives, but they just manage that. All the revenues and expenses remain the city's. At the beginning of the budget year, before the budget year, Indigo submits a preliminary budget that's reviewed and approved by the city through our budget process. So they put together a budget, we take a look at it, and we say, yes, that'll work, or no, we need to make an adjustment here or there. So we certainly control the budgeting aspect of the business operations of Antelope Hills. We continue, that being the city, we continue to perform the maintenance of the two 18-hole golf courses. That's a city responsibility. Under this operating structure, the revenues have increased about 40% from $2.7 million in 2014 to $3.8 million in fiscal year 2021. The expenses, unfortunately, have grown at a slightly slower pace, but FY21, we did show a $158,000 profit based just on revenues versus expenses, and I'm going to get into a little bit more of what the golf course brings in addition to just revenues and expenses, other spending that happens in the community through visitation, home sales, and all those types of things. And the golf rounds have gone from about 56,000 in fiscal year 14 to 90,000 this last year, which is great, but I'll talk a little bit later about that, but it does present its own problems. So in 2018, we had the National Golf Foundation do an economic impact study, and so the findings that they had were reflected in fiscal year 17. But what they came up with is that the gross operations were just under $3 million. I just pointed out in the previous slide, we're up to about $3.8 million now. They estimated there was 3,000 unique visitors to Prescott due to the presence of Antelope Hills Golf Course, father and son, Outhouse Open, a lot of those tournaments that have been going on for a long time that bring a lot of people in. The estimated direct impact on Prescott tourism sector was $2.21 million in FY17. And the total direct economic impact of Antelope Hills on Prescott in 2017 was estimated at $7.3 million. So it does bring a lot of other economic benefit other than just the revenues versus the expenses. In addition to that, it does a lot for the charitable community in Prescott here, a lot of charitable outings, 2,500 rounds of it, and we figure that through that, they raise $75,000 to $100,000 for the charity causes in fiscal year 17. These tend to be some of the bigger events. The Silent Witness was a couple weeks ago. That's a sold-out event. Sherry Hanna's Guns and Hoses, kind of a local event that sells out every year too. So it's nice to be a part of the community, and I think that's part of what I'm trying to show here is that the golf course is more than just revenues and expenses. It's part of the community. In 2017, again, fiscal year 17, the taxes that were produced from the golf course were about $41,000, $23,000 in transient occupancy tax. There's some internal charges that the golf course pays, and then, of course, we pay for the effluent water at the golf course, which now is closer to $300,000 a year. Obviously, we're in the area of the biggest growth in the city of Prescott right now, with Deep Well and the things that are happening around there. So we're very well positioned, and we feel like the golf course has a draw in bringing people here that want to retire and play golf. And we also feel like it's going to bring up the resale of those homes up a little bit too, just by the fact that the golf course is available to them. Some more of the non-economic impacts, obviously quality of life. It's a green space. It's a complement to, all the other things we have to offer, the lakes, historic downtown, our climate. It contributes to Prescott's brand and especially resonates with retirees and other golfers. I remember when we did this study in 2007 or 2018, we compared ourselves to like St. George, Utah, and some of these others that kind of are the same size communities, same sort of brand communities. And really, we ranked very, very high as far as it went of why people moved here. And it was really, in a lot of cases, for the outdoors and golf. Obviously, there's health and social benefits, public recreation. Our junior program is stronger than ever. Justin's a big part of that. We have two Arizona Golf Hall of Fame instructors out there, John Gumby and Mac McCarley, who's still with us. So we have a great staff, really seeing a lot more younger kids playing. Part of what we do at Antelope Hills, too, is we support the high schools. The Chino Valley golf program plays out there. Prescott High School plays out there. Basis plays out there. There's a handful of the schools. And then Embry-Riddle, of course. Special Olympics is another one that's really neat to see out there. And it's a pretty busy place. So challenges and opportunities. They're one and the same in most cases. Obviously, with 90,000 rounds from 56,000 a few years ago, it's can be difficult to keep the conditions of the golf courses up. And there's 4 reasons for that. And I just want to preface this by saying we, that being Justin and our staff, have been receptive to anybody who has any compliments, complaints, questions, or whatever. So to that end, a few weeks ago, we went out and met with all of the club representatives. There's 5 clubs out there, and just talked about some of the things that they're seeing and what could we do better. So we have an open dialogue with those folks. We value them as customers. We value them for what they bring to the golf course. So we're very transparent and very open with them. But there's 4 things that have really affected that in this current year, and that's the first one is the seasonal worker shortage. We cannot find. We typically want to send out at least 12 people every morning. You've got mowers, you're doing bunkers, you're doing restrooms. You're going to send 12 people out for a 36-hole golf course, and that's even marginal. But we can do that. A lot of times this year we're sending out 5. We're sending out 7. And we were paying $13 an hour. We raised that up to $15 an hour to try to incentivize some more workers. One of the things we talked about when we met with the club representatives is say, hey, here's one of our biggest problems. Can you help us? Can you send out an email to your club members and see if there's some people interested in working, at least part-time? And this had an effect. We brought a few people on because of that. It's kind of the theme of we're all in this together. So we have been able to kind of, close the gap a little bit. We're still short, but that's working against us. The environmental. First, we're burning up because we have no water, and we're trying to get effluent on the course to keep it alive. And the next thing you know, we're getting flooded. And this year, we had a big hailstorm that rolled through there. Some of the flooding is the worst I've seen. I've been playing golf out there for 36 years, and I haven't seen anything like I saw at least 3 times this last year. So we're burning up or we're flooding. The amount of play, as I said, 90,000 rounds, that's a lot of rounds to be played. And one of the other things that really kind of played into this that I think is hard for people to really understand is the reason we did 90,000 rounds is this winter we had nice daytime temperatures, but we had low nighttime temperatures. So the grass is dormant. We've got a lot of play on it. It has no ability to really defend itself or to come out of it. So while it's great that we had that amount of play, it did put us in a position coming right out of the gate when we got into the growing season a little bit behind. And then, of course, the last one is deferred maintenance. We've had golf courses older, 1992 with the South Course. It's the original irrigation system. I believe 1998 was the irrigation system for the North Course. And those are typically life expectancy on those irrigation systems is about 25 to 30 years. So we're past it and bumping up against it. As a consequence of that, we have irrigation breaks that we've been dealing with on a pretty regular basis. Not trying to present doom and gloom here because we're getting through it. People are coming out and playing. It's still a great experience, but we can do better. And then just when you think nothing else can happen, we have an emergency helicopter landing right before a shotgun tournament that's going to go off about 20 minutes before the helicopter successfully got off of there. But I kind of equate it to being a farmer, right? You get a good crop in there, and everything is going good, and a hailstorm runs through and just blows the crop up. Or you can't get in and plant because it's too wet. Or you can't get in and pick because it's too wet. So it's a lot like that. So you'll have these years where it's really good and years where maybe it's not so good when you just talk about revenues and expenses. So this brings me to my capital plan that we've talked about, that we put in motion here a couple years ago when I brought this the economic impact study for you guys to consider. We hired out for an irrigation specialist to do an irrigation study because that is obviously the biggest capital expense that we have. His name is Marvin Mills. He does work all over the country. He was actually involved in Antelope Hills construction of the South Course, so very knowledgeable. He spent some time out there, went through everything, and we've got a phased plan on how we want to approach the irrigation improvements, including an item that will come to you for voting at the next voting meeting, which is replacing all of the controllers on the north and south golf course that control the watering. Those are antiquated, outdated, and really can't get replacement parts for them. Also, next fiscal year, not this fiscal year, we'll be coming back with a golf cart replacement. We'll be in year number 6, I believe, on our golf carts. That's a pretty good run. That, typically if you can get 5 years out of them, you're doing pretty good. This year, one of our capital projects is a parking lot expansion. One of the things from our success that we found out is that we're lacking some parking, and there's not a lot of great places to put it, but we do have a place that we can put in fairly inexpensively, and it'll create about 25 more parking spaces, which should alleviate the concerns, at least immediately, with the parking down Perkins Drive. Sand bunker improvements, we've been chipping away at these over the last few years. We're doing 2 or 3 a year. We'll continue to do that. We've got some golf course equipment out there. We just recently had a purchase come through council for a new mower. That mower we thought had 8,000 hours on it. It had 18,000 hours on it because it had rolled over. It was a 2001 model. So we're in need of some replacement. And again, that'll be phased over time. This is a 5-year thing that we're talking about here. And always we're going to be looking for the most economical way to replace our equipment or to do the work or whatever the case might be when it comes to capital. T-box renovations, another one we're chipping away at. We did some work on one here just last week, but that'll be going on over this next 5 years. Food and beverage equipment replacement. We've got some stuff in the restaurant that we'll need to replace over these next 5 years. And so roughly, and this number can go up or down, but we've got about $4 million in deferred capital that we really want to get going here in the next 5 years. And so really, I think that's about what I've got. And like I said, Justin Henderson's in the audience. And if you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer those.
Yep. Thank you, Joe. Good presentation. Appreciate the update and the overview. Questions, comments from the council? Let's go to Councilman Blair.
Thank you, Joe. It's been a great golf course for a lot of years, and occasionally we get people that complain, as you always do, whether it's not enough trees or too many trees or whatever the case may be. One complaint that I've received is the lack of maintenance on the chipping range and how tore up it is. Is there any idea of resodding that area and improving it?
Yeah, Councilman Blair, good question. And I did have somebody call me and say that somebody had called in. It's really a matter of priorities. We've got to start at the greens. When we're sending out 5 people and we should be sending out 12, I'm going to start at the greens and I'm going to work my way out from there. And maybe the roughs don't get mowed or maybe the bunkers don't get done. In a perfect world, if I'm fully staffed, yes, all that can happen. I'm aware of what the gentleman was talking about. We would like our practice facilities to be as good as they can possibly be. if we have a choice when it comes to priorities, we're going to prioritize the play. You know, what people are going to be playing.
I guess my question is because we have so many turf areas out there, don't we have a way with a sod cutter to remove and replace with a sod farm and, you know, sand it where it can be done pretty quickly and pretty inexpensively?
It certainly could be if we made that a priority.
Right. Okay. So I would just say I know that the putting green out there is good because I've been on it.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, some of those areas maybe just to turn the focus a little bit and replace half the chipping area with some sod and then, you know, let it grow a little while and then replace the other one. And I'm not going to tell you how to do your job because I do that too much anyhow, like on the softball fields.
No, that's fine. And part of that, too, I think what we're seeing there is a fungus. Sometimes, you know, when you get these rains, they're great for the grass to grow, but they also introduce some of that stuff. So that's part of what you're seeing there, too. And I did look at the picture after I'd been notified about the call, and I think that the picture maybe isn't taken at the best angle. I'm not saying it's photoshopped, but...
Okay, just as long as you're aware of it, that's all that matters.
Yes.
Councilman Sischka.
Thanks for your presentation, Joe. When you were talking about the sand bunkers, does that mean you're actually going to put some sand in them?
Councilman Shiska, that's a good question. I'm assuming you find yourself in the sand bunkers every once in a while.
I know I shouldn't be there, but yes, I enjoy the beach every once in a while.
As do I. We have actually this last spring, we did something that we haven't done before. I took all of my park staff, and we had 28 people out there, and we went through the north course and did some seeding, and we worked on the bunkers and added sand to the bunkers. Can we do more? Yes. Will we do more? Yes.
Okay, thank you. And tee boxes. I remember at one point we had this conversation after my wife had complained about being just a few feet in front of the men's tee boxes. So are you going to go a little easier on the women this time?
When I say tee box renovations, that's part of it. Especially the north course is a little long for the ladies, and we do need to do some forward tees. So that renovation item I had in there is not only renovating existing, but it's also moving some of those tee boxes up to make it better. South course is not terrible for length for the ladies, but the north is. Of course, it was built in 1956, and you know the thinking was a little different.
They didn't have lady golfers then, did they?
Yeah, probably not as many. We have a great contingent of lady golfers out there. The ladies' clubs are growing faster than the men's club, so it's wonderful.
No, it's good news, Joe. Thanks.
Councilperson Rusing.
Thank you. I support the golf course 100%. We need to realize it's a public golf course and it's open to all, whether you live here or not. And it is important, as you illustrated, for our quality of life here. But I have a question about the fees. When was the last fee increase? Because it looks like our expenses are increasing. Have we had any fee increase lately?
We had a small fee increase, and you know, before I went to work for the city, I was actually a volunteer on the mayor's advisory committee for the golf course, and we struggled with exactly what you're saying. Should we raise the rates? We found that we raised the rates, we lowered the number of rounds played, and the revenue about netted out. But to your point, we did a small increase. We're looking at another small increase. We're looking also at we have what's called an advantage card out there for the more regular golfers, so that we can kind of protect the core golfers, if you will. So to answer your question, Councilmember Rusing, yes, we are looking at a fee increase, and that, in this case, if it drives the rounds down a little bit, it's probably not the end of the world.
And do all the fees paid go into the golf course fund?
Yes, they do.
Okay, thank you. Reinvested. Okay.
Joe, it seems like Manzanita Grill's probably pretty popular with all the growth out there. There's not really restaurants out in that vicinity, right?
It's great. And like I said, this is the first year that we broke $1 million in revenue. But I guess the food industry, a little bit like everything, our food costs went crazy for a while. Beef went nuts on us. The fish fries is really, really a good draw. And you're right, there's not a lot of restaurants out there right now. So we're hoping that we can get in a normal year here and get the banquets back up and keep the F&B up where we had it this last year a little bit better. We'll see if the stars will align for us.
Yeah.
I have one quick question. What percentage of revenue would you say you put back into maintenance?
Everything plus, because if you think about it, so this last fiscal year we made $158,000. We'll be coming to you this year, off the top of my head, probably around $600,000 in capital expense.
Okay.
So really, you're in effect subsidizing the golf course to that $450,000 or whatever that difference is. But again, I want to point out that there's more than just the revenues versus the expenses. There's the other economic impacts that the golf course brings.
And that's a huge
But to answer
deal.
your question, it all goes back in plus some.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Well, there's no golf courses with any of these housing developments up north. So, you know, you guys, like you said, are well positioned in that regard. And it's kind of nice they don't have to put in a golf course, which isn't as popular as it used to be back in the 2000s or previous. So,
yes.
Councilman Sischka.
Thanks, Mayor. So, Joe, what do you think is capacity in rounds?
I think that 90,000 I believe it was 2000, the biggest year at Antelope Hills, they did 100,000 rounds. Don't know if the math was quite as exact as what we're at right now, but let's just say that's about, maybe it's equivalent to the 90,000 rounds that we did. I think those rounds might have been a little inflated. That's getting up there. You know, it kind of depends upon the weather conditions that you get, because if you're trying to get 90,000 rounds out and you're doing it when the golf course is experiencing a lot of rain, you're not keeping golf carts off of it, then you're going to have a lot of, you know, unintended consequences that would come for that. To answer your question, though, I think about 90,000 is comfortable.
Okay, so are you concerned about the growth in North Prescott? Because that certainly is going to funnel more people to Antelope Hills.
The rates will probably be what will dictate the rounds eventually.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you.
Supply and demand. Any public comment, sir? All right. Thank you, Joe. Appreciate it. Nothing else on the study session. This meeting is adjourned.